The Pech River Valley in Afghanistan is a place of brutal beauty, a jagged scar carved through the Hindu Kush Mountains. Its steep, unforgiving slopes are a fortress for those who know them, and a death trap for those who don't. In the late summer of 2011, this valley became a cage. 3 companies of Army Rangers and Green Berets assigned Task Force Trident had pushed deep into the Korangal's southern reach, chasing a high-value target. They were the tip of the spear, nearly 400 of America's finest, and they were walking into a perfectly laid trap. The insurgents, a seasoned mix of local militia and foreign fighters, knew their terrain. They let the Americans push past the point of no return, into a narrow basin where the valley walls climbed thousands of feet on 3 sides. Then they sealed the entrance. From fortified positions on every ridge, a storm of machine gun fire, RPGs and mortar rounds rained down. The initial assault was a symphony of coordinated violence, designed to pin the Americans in a kill zone from which there was no escape. At Bagram Airfield, hundreds of miles away, the operations center was a hive of controlled chaos. The men in that room were warriors, but they were also pragmatists, bound by the rigid logic of warfare. The facts were grim. The steep terrain created a terrifying problem for air support. High altitude, fast-moving jets like the F-16s and FA-18s couldn't get a proper angle of attack without risking flying straight into a mountain. Even if they could, the proximity of the enemy to friendly forces SWAT soldiers called danger close was a nightmare. A single bomb string by mere feet would mean the helicopters, the Workhorse, Chinooks, and Blackhawks couldn't land. The landing zones were too hot, swept by a hail of gunfire that would shred any aircraft daring to descend. Ammunition on the ground was being measured in minutes, not hours. The radio crackled with desperate, disciplined calls for support that no one could provide. In the sterile environment of the command center, a terrible consensus began to form. Men who had sent soldiers into battle countless times were now preparing for the unthinkable. Writing off the entire force, they were quietly preparing the protocols for a catastrophic loss, a designation that would haunt the command for decades. But far from that room of grim-faced colonels, another set of eyes was watching the same data streams, the same drone feeds, and seeing something entirely different. 26-year-old Captain Maya Valkyrie Jensen sat in a debriefing room for a routine training flight. Her mind a million miles away. Maya was Anaten Thunderbolt II pilota, Warthog driver. The A-10 wasn't sleek or fast. It was a flying tank, built around a 7-barrel Gatling gun the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. It was designed for one purpose: to kill things on the ground, up close and personal. And Maya was born to fly it. Yet, in the eyes of her superiors, she was a problem. An evaluation report had labeled her overly intuitive and emotionally invested, code words for a pilot who didn't fit the rigid visa book mold. She asked too many questions, ran too many unsanctioned hypotheses, and saw the battlefield not as a set of coordinates, but as a living, breathing puzzle. So, she'd been sidelined, relegated to training new pilots and flying proficiency sorties over an empty desert. While her peers flew combat missions, she was teaching rookies how to handle crosswind. But as she watched the trap in the Pech Valley unfold on a secondary monitor, a cold dread mixed with a surge of adrenaline. She wasn't just watching a crisis, she was watching a nightmare she'd already lived 100 times. This exact scenario, a conventional force trapped in a complex kill box where standard air support doctrine was useless, anything she had been studying, obsessing over, for the better part of a year. Everyone saw a tragedy in the making. Maya Jensen saw a math problem she had already solved. Her obsession had started with a forgotten after-action report from an engagement a decade earlier, where a small reconnaissance team had been similarly pinned down and nearly wiped out. The official report blamed unforeseen topographical challenges. Maya saw a failure of imagination. She saw pilots clinging to rules that were written for flat battlefields, for deserts and plains, not for the vertical hellscapes where modern wars were being fought. That report sent her down a rabbit hole. On her own time, after hours, she commandeered the flight simulators. The maintenance techs, fond of the quiet pilot who always brought them coffee, looked the other way. They knew she wasn't just playing games. She was working. Night after night, she programmed the simulators with impossible scenarios. using declassified topographical maps of Afghanistan's most treacherous regions. She built the Pech Valley inside that machine, pixel by pixel, ridge by ridge. She pushed the A-10's flight model to its breaking point, practicing maneuvers that would make a flight instructor's hair turn white. She mastered flying low and slow, nearly stalling, using the valley walls as shields, while Doctrine preached long, sweeping gun runs from a safe altitude. Maya practiced something else entirely, a kind of aerial surgery. She memorized the ballistic drop of the 30mm PGU-14B. B armor-piercing incendiary round to the inch. She learned how to fire in impossibly short bursts, 5, 7, 10 rounds, not the long, indiscriminate spray most pilots favored. These weren't strafing runs. They were sniper shots from a 17,000-pound rifle. Her Bible became the concept of danger close. The official manual said, "You don't fire within a certain number of meters of friendly troops." Maya saw that number not as a rule, but as a starting point. She spent hundreds of hours in the simulator practicing how to thread her cannon fire through the needle. She set up virtual friendlies, marked by their infrared strobes, and virtual enemies, marked by their muzzle flashes, and practiced placing her rounds in the tiny gap between them. Over and over and over. It was a terrifying, intricate dance of physics, timing, and instinct. It was a skill no one had ever asked her to learn. It became muscle memory. Her commanders saw a pilot who was disengaged from her assigned duties. Her peers saw a loner who spent more time with maps than with people. What none of them saw was a warrior forging a weapon. She wasn't just learning to fly. She was learning to see. She sketched the valley on paper, marking enemy fields of fire in red pencil, friendly dead zones in blue. She mapped out potential SAM surface-to-air missile launch sites' escape routes, and most importantly, the hidden seams in the terrain, the small folds and depressions that didn't show up on standard digital maps, but could offer a few precious feet of cover. She was preparing for a war no one else believed could be fought. The call over the command net was the one she had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. All air assets. Hold station. Repeat. Hold station. Ground element is danger close. I say again, danger close. It was a death sentence, delivered in the calm, professional language of military procedure. The window for action was closing. On Tigrun, men were dying. In the air, pilots were circling, helpless. The command staff fell back on what they knew. Doctrine. And Doctrine said this was an impossible fight. Wait for a special operations helicopter team. Wait for a drone to get a clearer picture. Wait for the enemy to make a mistake. Wait. But Maya knew the insurgents wouldn't make a mistake. They had chosen this ground for a reason, and the men of Task Force Trident didn't have time. In that moment, a lifetime of being told to follow the rules collided with the absolute certainty of what she had to do. The face of every young soldier she'd ever shared a meal with in the chow hall flashed through her mind. She thought of her own brother, an infantryman. To her, those weren't just 400 men. They were brothers, sons, and fathers. Her decision was made in a heartbeat. There was no debate, no hesitation. There was only the cold, clear logic of her preparation meeting the fire of the moment. She walked calmly to the operations desk, grabbed a piece of paper, and wrote a short, simple note, leaving it under a coffee mug where she knew her wing commander would find it. It wasn't an apology. It was an explanation. It read, "I know the risks. I also know the terrain. The doctrine is wrong. I can save them. Forgive me." She walked out to the flight line, her movements purposeful and swift. The ground crew for her A-10, Calcine Thunderbolt 3, saw the look in her eyes and asked no questions. They knew this wasn't a training flight. As she strapped into the cockpit, the familiar smells of jet fuel and worn leather enveloped her. It was the only place she ever truly felt at home. She went through the pre-flight check with an almost serene calm, her hands moving with an economy and grace born of thousands of hours of practice. She didn't ask for clearance. She didn't wait for the tower. She simply taxied onto the runway, pushed the throttles to the firewall, and launched her Warthog into the darkening sky. A lone angel of vengeance, climbing toward the mountains. As she flew over the valley, The battlefield materialized below her. A terrifying, living replica of her simulator drills and hand-drawn maps. The chaos, the smoke, the strobing lights of friendly and enemy fire, it was exactly as she had imagined. She saw the overlapping arcs of machine gun fire, just as she'd sketched them in red. She saw the likely SAM positions on the high ridges, and she saw the American forces nearly backed up against a sheer cliff face, on the verge of being completely overrun. She took a slow, calming breath, her heart a steady drum against her ribs. She keyed a radio, her voice cutting through the desperate chatter with unnerving clarity. Trident, Actuile, this is Thunderbolt 3. I am on station. A voice, strained and full of disbelief, came back. Thunderbolt trays, we were told no air support was available. You are not cleared for this zone. You are danger close. I know, Maya replied, her eyes scanning the ridges. Mark your... I'll take the rest. There was a moment of stunned silence on the ground. For the Rangers and Green Berets of Task Force Trident, hope had become a foreign concept. They were fighting a battle of inches, conserving every last bullet, preparing to be annihilated. Then, they heard her. The A-10 Warthog doesn't sound like other jets. It doesn't scream, it growls. And its cannon, the GA-U-8 Avenger, makes a sound unlike anything else on Earth, a deep, guttural roar that rips the air apart. Famously described by troops as BRRRT. It's the sound of salvation. Maya lined up her first pass, not from high above, but from down in the valley itself, using the terrain to mask her approach. She came in low and fast, a gray specter against the rock. Her target was a machine gun nest on the eastern ridge that was tearing the American flank to shreds. An F-16 pilot would have needed a 500-pound bomb, and from this angle, the blast radius would have killed friendlies. The nest was a mere 70 meters from the Ranger line. Doctrine said it was untouchable. Maya's hands were steady on the stick. She saw the muzzle flashes. She saw the friendly IR strobes. She saw the sliver of ground between them. Her thumb depressed the trigger for less than half a second. BRRT. A stream of 30mm tungsten rounds, each the size of a beer bottle, slammed into the rock face with surgical precision. The machine gun nest vanished in a cloud of dust and shrapnel. The firing from that position stopped. Instantly. On the ground, a grizzled master sergeant, who had been convinced he was about to die, keyed his radio, his voice raw with emotion. Holy. Thunderbolt 3. Good hit. Good hit. That was all the confirmation she needed. She had proven her theory. It was possible. She banked hard, the G-forces pressing her into her seat. The enemy, shocked by the appearance of an A-10 in a place no A-10 should be, began to adjust. They had anticipated high-altitude bombers, not a predator hunting them at eye level. They shifted their fire, and a new threat emerged. The telltale smoke trail of a shoulder-fired SAM streaking toward her. But Maya was already ahead of them. She had marked that position on her maps months ago. She popped flares, broke hard left, and watched the missiles soar harmlessly past her canopy. Then she rolled back in, and before the launch team could even think about reloading, another 10-round burst from her cannon erased them from the ridge. She worked with a ruthless efficiency. She wasn't just a pilot, she was a conductor, and the battlefield was her orchestra. She saw the enemy not as a disorganized mob, but as a system. She identified the key nodes of the machine guns that provided suppressive fire, the mortars teams that pinned the Americans down, the command elements trying to coordinate the attack. She took them apart, piece by piece. Short, surgical taps of the cannon, a single rocket for a fortified bunker. She flew with a preternatural understanding of the battle's rhythm, hitting the enemy right as they tried to move, cutting off their crossfires before they could be established. The men on the ground had never seen anything like it. Air support was supposed to be a blunt instrument. This was a scalpel. They weren't just being saved. They were witnessing an artist at work. Back in the Bagram Operations Center, chaos reigned. The duty officers were screaming into their radios. Colonel Abrams, the wing commander, stared at the drone feed. His face, a mask of fury and disbelief. He had a rogue pilot on his hands, a flagrant breach of every rule in the book. A court-martial was the least of what she could expect. His career was likely over, but as he watched, his anger began to curdle into something else. He saw what his subordinates did not. He saw a pilot who wasn't just flying an aircraft. She was reading the very soul of the battlefield. Every pass she made, every burst she fired, had a purpose. She wasn't just killing the enemy. She was hurting them. She was shaping the fight. On the ground, the effect was immediate. The relentless pressure on Task Force Trident began to ease. With every ridge she cleared, Maya bought the soldiers below another 20 or 30 meters of movement. They were no longer pinned down. They could maneuver. Her voice over the radio became their lifeline, a calm, steady presence in the storm. Trident, this is Thunderbolt. I see a fold in the west ridge, about 200 meters from your current position. It's a shallow draw, but it should give you cover from the north. Pop smoke. I'll cover your move. It was the seam. The one she'd found months ago on a dusty topographical map. A slight depression that was invisible from above and from the ground. But one she knew was there. The ground commander, trusting the angel on his shoulder, gave the order. As the Americans began to move, the insurgents surged, trying to cut them down in the open. It was then that Maya's mastery became legendary. She put her warthog into a tight, continuous orbit around the moving soldiers, a guardian angel made of titanium and tungsten. As enemy fighters popped up to fire, she would roll in and stitch a line of cannon fire between them and the Americans. The rounds impacted so close that the Rangers could feel the heat and the impact in the soles of their boots. It was terrifying and exhilarating. It felt, as one soldier would later say, like she was building a wall of fire to protect us. She wasn't just suppressing the enemy. She was creating a moving sanctuary, a corridor of safety carved directly through the heart of the kill zone. With Maya methodically dismantling the enemy's anti-aircraft capabilities, a new possibility emerged. The SAM sights were gone. The heavy machine guns were silenced. The risk to helicopters was still high, but it was no longer suicidal. The call went out that Chinooks were coming in. It would be the most dangerous phase of the operation. A big, slow-moving helicopter trying to land in a dusty, confined space while under fire is the most vulnerable target imaginable. Maya knew her job had just changed. She was no longer just providing cover. She was the gatekeeper. Nothing would touch those birds. She held the ridges, a relentless hawk circling the valley. Her eyes, honed by 1,000 hours of practice, scanned for any hint of a threat. An RPG team setting up in a cluster of rocks. A machine gun team crawling to a new position. She saw them before they could even shoulder their weapons. A burst from her cannon, and the threat was gone. She became proactive, not reactive, killing ambushes before they could be sprung. The first Chinook, a massive CH-47, lumbered into the valley, its rotors kicking up a blinding storm of dust and sand. The brownout conditions were a pilot's worst nightmare. But guided by Maya's voice and protected by her guns, the pilot brought it down. The ramp dropped, and wounded soldiers were loaded aboard. For 90 agonizing seconds, the helicopter was a sitting duck. Maya flew a pattern so tight and aggressive around the landing zone that the insurgents couldn't get a clean shot. The Chinook lifted off, clawing for altitude, and escaped. One by one, they came. Each time, the process was the same. A terrifying descent, a frantic scramble to load soldiers, and a heart-stopping ascent, all under the watchful eye of Thunderbolt 3. Maya stayed on station through every single lift. Her fuel ran low. Warning lights blinked on her console, but she refused to leave. She was a mother wolf, protecting her pack, and she would not back down until every last one was safe. Finally, the last tailgate bird, loaded with the remaining command element, began its ascent. As it cleared the ridge, a final, desperate RPG team emerged from a cave, drawing a bead on the helicopter's exposed tail. Maya, anticipating this exact move, was already rolling in. Her cannon spoke one last time, a final, defiant BRRRT echoed through the valley. On the drone feed, the words were not audible, but for everyone watching, the message was clear. She had written the final line with her cannon. Not today. The flight back to Bagram was the longest of Maya's life. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and the chilling realization of what she had done. She had saved them, yes, but she had also disobeyed a direct order, stolen a combat aircraft, and broken every rule in the book. She fully expected to be arrested the moment she stepped out of the cockpit. As she taxied her battered warthog toward her parking spot, she noticed something odd. The flight line, usually a hive of activity, was silent. Maintainers, avionics specialists, even clerks from the admin buildings were standing in silent rows. They just watched her. When she finally shut down the engines and the canopy hissed open, the silence was broken. It started with a single person clapping, then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire flight line had erupted in a thunderous, sustained applause. These were the people who knew the aircraft, who knew the rules, and who had watched the drama unfold on their screens. They knew what she had risked and what she had accomplished. Colonel Abrams was waiting for her at the bottom of the ladder. His face was unreadable, a stone mask. He let the applause die down before he spoke, his voice low and firm so only she could hear. "Captain Jensen," he began, the words clipped and formal. "You disobeyed a direct order. You risked a $20 million aircraft. You violated every regulation regarding close air support and unauthorized flight operations. You have created a political and logistical nightmare for this command that will take me months to untangle." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Maya stood before him, covered in sweat, her flight suit smelling of cordite and fear, ready to accept her fate. Then, the colonel's expression soft, just for a fraction of a second. A flicker of something that looked like profound respect appeared in his eyes. "You also," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, "brought home 379 American soldiers today. Not one friendly, Kier. Not one." He looked past her, at the men and women still watching them. He looked back at Maya, and the full weight of his command settled into his next words. His only order that day was one she never expected. "My office, 0800. Tomorrow," he said, "I want you to teach us. Teach us exactly how you did it." In the months that followed, there was no court-martial. The story of what happened in the Pech Valley was buried under layers of official classification. But within the close-knit world of combat aviation, it became a quiet legend. Captain Maya Jensen, the pilot once dismissed as too emotional, became the architect of a revolution. Working directly with Colonel Abrams, she built a new training syllabus from the ground up. It was called the Advanced Close Air Support Development Program, but the pilots just called it Valkyrie's school. She threw out the old rulebooks that treated the ground as a two-dimensional map. She taught young pilots to see the terrain as a language. "Every ridge is a sentence," she would tell them. "Every valley is a paragraph. You have to learn to read it, to understand its grammar, before you can hope to fight in it." Her methods were unorthodox. She drilled them relentlessly in discipline and precision. She broke them of the habit of long, wasteful cannon runs, teaching them the art of the half-second tap. "You're surgeons, not butchers." She'd bark in the debris. "Kill the anchor of the enemy's positioned machine gun. The commander don't just spray at the crowd." She forced them to change how they communicated, insisting they talk to the soldiers on the ground, not at them. It wasn't about ego or showing off. It was about a sacred trust between the sky and the dirt. The simulators were reprogrammed with her impossible scenarios. The official doctrine began to shift, incorporating her radical ideas about low-altitude tactics and danger-close engagement. And in the main briefing room at Bagram, a simple, unadorned plaque was hung on the wall. It didn't have a fancy name or a long description. It just had a number. 379 extracted, 0 Kie. It became a silent, powerful reminder of what was possible when courage and preparation converged. Captain Maya Valkyrie Jensen never called herself a hero. When asked, she would say that timing, math, and a whole lot of luck were just as important as skill. She would point to the ground crews who gave her a perfect aircraft, and to the soldiers on the ground whose courage and discipline gave her something to fight for. But her story holds a truth that resonates far beyond any battlefield. It teaches us that sometimes the rules and systems we create, the very doctrines we rely on for safety and order, can become their own kind of trap. They can blind us to new possibilities and chain us to outdated ways of thinking. Maya's story shows us that true innovation, true progress, often comes from those who have the courage to look at a problem from a completely different angle and ask, what if there's a better way? Her preparation was her power. She wasn't reckless. She was the most prepared person for that specific, impossible moment. While others followed the established path, she was off in the wilderness, drawing her own maps. When the crisis came, the path everyone else was on led to a cliff. Her path led home. This story is a powerful lesson for our own lives. How often are we told to stay in our lane, to follow the procedure, to not rock the boat? How often do we let the fear of breaking the rules prevent us from doing what we know is right? Maya's story isn't about disobeying orders. It's about a higher level of obedience. She was obedient to the mission, which was to save lives. It reminds us that our unique perspectives, the very things that might make others see us as different or too emotional or not a team player, can be our greatest strengths. It's a call to trust the quiet voice inside, to put in the unseen hours of preparation, and to have the courage to act when your moment arrives. In that ballet, one pilot refused to accept the inevitable, and because of her dedication, her obsessive preparation, and her profound courage, 379 families got their loved ones back. So, let me ask you, what is the valley in your own life? What is the challenge that everyone else says is impossible? And what is the unique preparation you can do, the map you can draw, that might just show you the way through? Thank you for listening. I wish you all the best of health and clarity on your own paths. And if this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel for more content that explores the power of the human spirit.